Hi friends! I have another training type video for you on a question that I get asked a lot of times, which is waiting periods. What things have waiting periods? What things don't have wait periods? What are the waiting periods? How do you determine the waiting periods? All those things. So there are a couple of things that require a waiting period no matter what the circumstances are, okay? The biggest thing is bankruptcies. So there's basically two kinds of bankruptcies. Chapter 11, three. There's a Chapter 11, 13, which is a business bankruptcy. I see it very, very rarely. Chapter 13, which is a personal bankruptcy where they reorganize your debt and you make payments on your debt. So like if you owed a bunch of money in credit cards and all this other debt, instead of making your normal payments, which may cost you more money than you have monthly, they reorganize their debt. The creditors typically will accept lower payments or they'll settle for a lower balance so that the consumer can pay it off in a way that's more manageable for them. So usually a Chapter 13 bankruptcy, somebody works at paying it off over a long period of time. The requirements for that are that we have to close 12 months after the date that the bankruptcy was discharged, meaning completed, they've paid it in full. And usually we have to provide a payment history for the last 12 months of the bankruptcy showing that all the payments were made on time. There are exceptions to this. You can technically close on a mortgage when you're within a Chapter 13 bankruptcy, but what you have to get in order to do that is permission from the bankruptcy trustee that says it's okay for you to buy a house. It's really, really difficult to do. I have closed them before, but they're hard. It's hard to have a credit score that's approvable when you're that close to a bankruptcy, and it's really hard to get the trustee's permission because mostly trustees are like, nah, I don't really think you should increase your debt. So the times that it has worked is when the person's mortgage payment was going to be less than or equal to whatever they were paying for housing. And for a lot of our buyers, that's not the case. The other kind of bankruptcy is a Chapter 7 bankruptcy. In a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, they wipe your debt clean. So you get a brand new clean slate. The waiting period for that for an FHA loan is 2 years minimum. Many times a bankruptcy includes a foreclosure. If it includes a foreclosure, it increases the waiting period to 3 years. And anytime you have a big negative financial event like a bankruptcy or foreclosure, we're going to have to document that the client has turned it around. So we want to see good positive payment history after the bankruptcy. And if they haven't had that, we're going to have a really good explanation why, what happened, that kind of thing. Because they want to see, the underwriters and our investors want to see that if somebody had a major financial event, that they've turned it around so that they're not likely to have another foreclosure on this property that they're trying to buy. Speaking of foreclosures, so there is a waiting period for foreclosures. There's a lot of controversy and questions about this. So the waiting period starts from the date the deed is transferred out of the consumer's name and into the bank's name. This can be really tricky because if the bank is not Johnny on the spot with processing their foreclosures, it can take years for them to actually deed it out of the borrower's name. I had one not long ago where it took the bank 7 years to deed it out of their name. They thought they'd had a foreclosure 7 years ago and it had been 7 months ago type situation. There's nothing that we can do about it. There's nothing that anybody can do to get around it. That's when it starts. So if you have a client that's had a foreclosure, the very first question that I'm going to ask them is, what was the address of that property that was foreclosed on? That's what I need to know because I'm going to look up the deed history on the property and I can say the exact date the deed was transferred, and then we know what we're working with. The credit report will also have a foreclosure date, but normally the date on the credit report is the date that the consumer no longer had to keep paying the loan because the bank took it from them, not the date the deed was transferred, which are two different dates and they can be very different. The other common thing that requires a waiting period is late mortgage payments. So the most common scenario is a man and a woman fall in love and they get married and they buy a house, and then at some point that goes really wrong and they decide that they're going to get divorced. And during the divorcing situation where somebody's separated and somebody's moving out and somebody's mad about this or that, somebody's living in the house and supposed to be making the payments and they don't. So usually our person is the person that didn't get the house that now wants to get another house. And there's lates on the mortgage that's still in their name. Most of the time, the late payment started before the divorce was final, because when you start getting divorced from somebody, typically you stop living with them most of the time. If our borrower was responsible for that mortgage payment, the date that it was late, they have to wait 12 months from the date of their last mortgage late payment before they can qualify for another mortgage. Very, very rarely clients have like mediation paperwork that they do prior to a divorce that says, hey, we're getting a divorce, we're in mediation, we're agreeing to you paying this and me paying this in the interim until the divorce is final. Almost nobody does it. If they have something documented saying that they weren't responsible for the mortgage when it was paid late, we're good to go. If they were responsible for it, we're in a waiting period and we're in a holding period. So that's something that happens a lot. Obviously, it's hard to have a credit score that's good enough to qualify if you have mortgage lates in the last 12 months. But it's possible, especially if before your divorce or before the mortgage started getting paid late, you had, high 700s or 800 credit scores. That mortgage rate's going to drop you, but not enough to not be qualified. So that requires a waiting period. A lot of things that people ask me about don't require a waiting period at all. An auto repossession? Yep, I don't care at all when your auto was repossessed. All of that's factored into the credit score. If you just had a late or your credit card's past due, we're going to ask that all accounts are brought current to do a loan, especially a VA loan. They are very big about requiring accounts be brought current. But there's no waiting period on that. Student loans and collection, big deal. I don't care when the lates are. I just care that they're not in a collection status. And once they're in a collection status, in order for them to get pulled out of a collection status, they have to call the student loan company and say, hey, I'm so sorry. I want to make it right. I want to pay you. And the student loan company puts them in what's called a rehabilitation plan. And they start paying back. And once they've been paying back for 10 to 12 months, then the student loan company says, okay, you're no longer in collection status, you're back to regular status. And that's generally what's needed to close on a home. That's not the end all be all. I have closed while we're still in a rehabilitation plan. But it's more difficult to do and that thing, which, we're all about doing difficult things. But I wanted you to know kind of the general waiting periods required. That's pretty much it. There are others, but those are the ones that I ask or that I get asked about most frequently. So if you have any questions about this content or any other, or if you have any questions about any deals, be happy to answer any of those questions, and just very grateful for the business that you sent. Thanks. Have a great day.